Okay, I'm just thinking about hardness and softness, and particularly in relation to science and this idea of realness. And I'm also thinking a little bit about particles and waves again. I've been reading and thinking about these things for a few days now, so it's all kind of mixed together in my head, you know what I mean? But several things. I mean, first off, and this is largely to do with metaphors, but when I'm talking about metaphors, I'm also talking about the way people think, you know, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we think in metaphors, not consciously, you know, on the unconscious levels of our, or the non-conscious levels of our cognitive processes. A lot of that is taking place through the use of figurative language or figurative thought, metaphors, irony, synecdoche, these kind of tropes that we associate more with poetry or with certain kinds of literary forms. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that's actually a lot of how we think as well. Even the most rational thought is often propelled by poetic thinking, non-cognitive, non-conscious cognitive processes. So that's where I'm coming from with that, but particularly in relation to hardness and realness. Because quite often, when we want to assert realness, this isn't for everyone, but this is kind of general thing that you find in the culture, I think. When we want to assert that something is real, we use metaphors of hardness and permanence and boundedness and strength, resilience, those kind of things, impermeability, immovability. I think for good reason, I guess. You know, the kind of defining feature of reality, and certainly in the West, and I think I'm saying in the West largely in the light of a video I made a couple of days ago to do with the fact that, you know, in the West, certainly since the Industrial Revolution and since the Scientific Revolution, it's been dominated by a material paradigm. And by that I mean a way of looking at the world which sees it as a series of solid objects, as substances, with the more solid the substance correlating to the more real we feel the item is. The same is not true of other cultures. The facts are the same. It's not the facts don't change, but the way we understand the facts through these non-conscious processes I mentioned does change. And here in the West, we are propelled by non-conscious metaphorical processes which draw upon hardness and discreteness. Actually, I was reading this morning, just in relation to that, about how Chinese culture was much more ready to accept something like gravity than the West was. You know, when Newton came out with gravity, it was widely condemned because it sounded too much like magic. You know, action at a distance is that stuff that's not kind of allowed within a conventional, old-fashioned version of a material universe, of matter. It was thought that the only way cause and effect could take place, the only way that communication could happen between one object and another, between one event and another, was through the material collision of hard objects like billiard balls, or the engagement of connected gears like in a clock. And so the idea of action at a distance, the idea that I could do something, or that an entity could do something thousands of miles away and it could have an effect on me without any intervening collisions of atomic building billiard balls, that idea was thought to be superstitious, and Newton was condemned for kind of, or criticised at least, for bringing in God through the back door, or you know, using essentially a supernatural notion. But that which isn't the case. You know, gravity is a field phenomenon, and field phenomena don't fit in very well with matter-based paradigms, but they do fit in perfectly well with the kind of wave and energy paradigms that were common, I think still are common to a large extent, in places like China. And because of that, the idea of action at a distance, which is perfectly fine in field understanding, the idea of gravity was much more rapidly accepted, as I say, in China. Wandered off quite a long way from the topic, if I might. So here we have the idea of the real is that which is hardest, and the harder something is, the more metaphorically real, or the more metaphorically hard something is, the more real we feel it is. And we look to hard things as metaphors for reality. You know, we pound the table and say this is real. There's story about Ben Jonson, I think it is, kicking a stone just to demonstrate the reality of lived experience, that he wasn't living in a dream world, you know, maybe it was Galileo. Anyway, somebody did that. You kick something hard, and the hardness of it brings your mind back to reality. So again, hardness and reality are metaphorically enacted out in those kind of moments, that correspondence that's going on in our understanding. Whereas of course softness, or impermanence, mutability, wave-like phenomenon, forces that act at a distance, those are associated with unreality, irrationality, and non-science in many ways, even though they are part of science, of course, these days. They still form part of a kind of common understanding. You know, these metaphors of softness and hardness still populate and give rise to intuitions about the reality or irreality of science, or the reality of certain claims, and the scientific merit of certain claims. You know, you still get people, a lot of people, saying that psychology isn't a science, sociology isn't a science, as if by simply attributing that name to something, it would make a difference. Actually, interestingly enough, there was a video by the Greatex put up, which is a critique of an older video by Richard Feynman from years ago, where he was criticising the social sciences. And he's not the only one. You know, a lot of people who work in the notionally the hard sciences do criticise the softer sciences as being illegitimate in some way, because they don't come out necessarily with such hard facts. By hard facts I mean facts that are clearly bounded edges that don't change over time, like a stone. Social facts, the kind of facts that Durkheim talked about, social science theorist. Social facts don't have clearly bound edges, they do change over time, they don't have the universality of application, all those kind of things. So they tend to be, they correlate more with softer understandings of things that are soft. But anyway, but Richard Feynman's quite interesting, because he is quite critical of the soft sciences, and that's kind of revealed in some of his, where that's coming from is kind of revealed in some of his other language and some of his other explanations. Because he's a really interesting guy, Richard Feynman, but and some of his ideas were pretty out there for the time. And one thing he talks about is what I think he calls the quantum electrodynamic field. Field of quantum fluctuations that we all live within. But the way he described that, he describes it in a number of ways. One way he describes it as a surface of a swimming pool, and being an insect, having one of your feelers dipped into the pool, so you're just feeling the waves rippling across the surface of the pool. And that's a little bit like the experience that we have with our senses attuned to a tiny fragment of the quantum electrodynamic field. So he does that, but he also elsewhere describes the quantum electric dynamic field as a field made up of small things that jiggle, he says. Small things that jiggle. Which, you know, is very interesting. That's the way he's conveying his understanding, by using what's essentially an atomic model. A model of the universe made up of small hard things that jiggle around a bit. So, you know, even an expert like him is revealing in some ways that he is also wedded to a paradigm, a material paradigm, and not just a material paradigm, but a material paradigm in which the universe is made of matter, and matter is the small hard stuff. He wouldn't say that, but it's populating his understanding on some level. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to use phrases like that, would he? So, to conclude, the way we tend to think, and this is all about the way we tend to think, this is all about the paradigms which are all informing our understanding, and paradigms change depend on who you are, where in the world you are, and whereabouts in history you are. Facts might not change, but your interpretation of those facts, the big picture you draw out of those facts, does change according to what paradigm you're ploughing through this stuff. And the paradigm that we have still, coming out of Democritus and the ancient Greeks, the atomic theory of those guys, but reinforced strongly by people like Newton, by the development of material science in the 16th and 17th century, by the development of chemistry in the kind of 18th, 19th century, and biology, in which the universe becomes understood in terms of small things that jiggle, small hard things that jiggle. That's still propelling our understanding. So hardness becomes associated with not only with scientific truth, but reality and validity and other kinds, and the fact. The prototypical fact is a scientific fact. The prototypical science is a hard science. And other kinds of sciences, other kinds of knowings. The word science is problematic in some ways. It's not a clearly bounded category, it's a radial category. But other forms of knowing, which don't produce quite such stable results, aren't so well bounded, tend to inherit some of the weaker versions of reality that's associated with softness. Hard objects are the most real. Softer objects are less real somehow. Therefore, hard facts produced by hard science are more real than softer facts produced by softer science. And there's a hierarchy there, isn't there? Anyway, I'm driving through fog here. Fucking fog. But I guess fog is an example of small things that jiggle. Small things in Brownian motion. But the universe isn't made of fog.